craziest road trip you've been on that involves traveling to a stakes race?
It was probably this year with Jody Jameson to the Meadowlands. Our flight was cancelled, so we had to jump on a private plane, and we landed in the Poconos, rented a car, went to the Meadowlands. I got there like 3 minutes before post time. That was just spectacular.
Well, they've been pretty tame, really. I guess going to the Jug. I actually went down when the year Ralph won the Jug. There was a busload of us left out of the back kitchen here to go watch it, and that was pretty crazy.
Been a lot of them. I don't know. I went from Sudbury to Ottawa and back home. That was like 3 days. That was pretty tough 3 days.
Paducah, Kentucky. Flying there with my partners and winning a Kentucky Sire stake, breaking the track record, which was 159 and 3 or 4, I believe. But it was a good trip.
We went to the Little Brown Jug last year. Not we weren't in it, but that was the road trip was rather interesting. Let's just leave it at that. What happens to the Little Brown Jug stays in the Little Brown Jug.
Well, I embarked on to the Tioga Drivers' Championship last year with Curtis McDonald and Jamie Fellows, and Curtis did have a GPS in his car, but I figured I knew more than the GPS, and we ended up on a 4-hour drive. Took us about 6, and we saw all the backcountry roads in New York State. That's about the craziest I want to talk about.
Well, we actually, my wife Rhonda and I and a friend of mine, Don Hall, went to St. John to race a filly. This is probably 20 years ago, and I had a wheel come off our trailer on the way home. And we were probably 2 hours from home and got picked up by another guy with a truck and a trailer, and we all had to get in the trailer with the horses, and it was a cold, miserable, rotten night in the Maritimes, wind, rain, howling, and that was an experience for sure. A stake race, an experience. I don't know if I would do that today or not, but we did it.
Oh, definitely 2000 Little Brown Jug. Yeah, that's definitely. And there was another one, a driver's challenge somewhere in Maryland. I think it was Rosecroft or something. Can't talk about that one. But yeah, the 2000 Jug for sure.
Probably 2 years ago, I was supposed to go to the Des Smith, and I got stuck at the airport. 3 hours, I think. And, I made it, and the race was going when I landed, so it was no good.
I would have to say it had something to do with Bill Wellwood. He was quite the character. There was always an adventure, always something happened when we were together. Probably too many stories to tell. Some of them just probably wouldn't be too believable. So I'm just going to say it involved Bill Wellwood.
Well, one time I flew to Montreal to race a horse for Mr. Matt Cuddy, and John Burns was on the small plane, and we're supposed to come back to Toronto and land here, and then I had to drive to Windsor to race at Windsor that night, and I talked Mr. Burns into, let's go to Windsor. Took a little whiskey to talk him into it, but I talked him into it and went to Windsor, and then he wasn't there when the plane left, so I just left him in Windsor, and he had to get a cab home. I guess that was about the craziest trip I was ever on.
I've had several that the flight wasn't all that great because we were private, and they can get pretty shaky, some of them small ones. We weren't traveling in a Lear jet or anything like that. I went to race Q-Light in the Des Smith, and we rented from Doc McCall's what we rented from. I think it was a twin engine. There was 4 of us. And I always remember, I said, Jesus, Doc, I said, we'd have been better to take the 401 because we never left the 4. It looked like we followed the 401 all the way to Ottawa.
Well, I was at the Jug one time when I was 16 there, and that was a lot of fun. I went down with a couple of guys who worked for my dad and stuff. It seemed like everything we did we were getting in trouble for, so I was pretty young then too, so it was a lot of fun and definitely a lot of good racing on that week. So.
Well, I wasn't on this trip, but Ross, that works for me, was on this trip. And they were going to Rideau Carleton. and Bobby Cooley was driving Zeron's truck, and the lads there kept kind of recommending that he get some fuel for the truck, and of course he run out, you know. Now they're walking down the road with fuel cans and trying to get this thing going. They didn't know if they were going to make the races. The one good thing was my filly was in late, so I was pretty sure they could have walked her the rest of the way there, but they got it going, and we got to torture the hell out of Cooley for it, and that was the best part.
I drive a lot with the McDonald boys, and it can get pretty exciting at times. They're just kind of goofy and always playing around. It seems like every time they pass a horse trailer, someone's got to drop their pants and stick their butt out the window and moon them.
I raced one afternoon in Columbus, Ohio at the Ohio State Fair. Got on a plane to go to New Jersey to fly to Toronto, and there was thunderstorms in New Jersey, so we were held up in Ohio. Got to New Jersey. It was the same year that Dwayna won the Hamiltonian because Ronnie Dancer and I were on the same plane, and I couldn't get out of Jersey because there were storms, and then the plane I was supposed to run was canceled, so I ended up running across the airport to another terminal and getting on the last Air Canada flight into Toronto, and that was like, it was midnight or something, and I started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was just run and cancellations and everything. So it wasn't. If I'd have drove, I would have been home 4 hours earlier. So.
Well, actually, I didn't get to the stake race, but I got turned back at the border in Buffalo, so they mistook me as a jockey instead of a driver. One of the few times I was ever nervous in my life, but when you're nervous with the customs people, then hey, some red flag went up and they turned me back at the border.
We had a private jet with a bunch of the drivers, and our heads were bouncing off the roofs, and it wasn't a whole lot of fun. And I think Jody was steering the plane for half the time, so that was a little bit crazy.
A couple of weeks ago, there was 6 of us went in a limo to Ottawa, and it was quite an excursion. It was Dougie McNair, Robert Shepard, Aaron Byrne, who else was there? Billy Davis and James McDonald, and that was the first time we kind of all took a limo there, and it was kind of good.
It was on the way back from Europe maybe 4 years ago, from Norway. My plane was late leaving, and I had a connecting flight in Germany somewhere, and I missed my connecting flight, and I had to go through the airport and make my own arrangement to travel on a train for 3 hours to get to a different airport to make a flight back to Toronto, and that was when the volcanoes were erupted over there, and the flights were canceled weeks at the time. That was very stressful. It turned out that I did get on the super train, and we got to Berlin on time, and I got on Air Canada and were able to fly back home. But I think that was with enough talk 3 years ago. That was really hectic coming back home.
Well, we had back when I used to smoke, I had the back of the truck on fire one time heading to Rito Carl. Threw a cigarette butt out of the window, and about 10 miles down the truck was on fire.
I would have to say Trevor Ritchie and myself, the day we were going down for the Hamiltonian a couple of years ago. There was a big thunderstorm that was at the Meadowlands. I was down to drive, Trevor was actually down to drive in the Hamiltonian, and I was down to drive a trotter for Tony Montini. And we got down to the Meadowlands, weren't allowed to land, got shoved up to Syracuse, stayed there for 4 hours, had 2 kids kicking the back of my seat while we were sitting on the runway, got completely annoyed, missed the race, listened to it on TV, then the plane took off and landed us in Newark, and then we were fortunate enough to get a flight at 11:30 to fly back home. So that was a fun-filled day that started around 8:30 in the morning and ended at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Was that even worse for you because then Mr. Easy went at 1?
Yeah, and then that was even actually worse because Mr. Easy I went out and won, and then what made it even twice as bad, his teacher come up and thanked me for giving him the drive. You know? So, yeah, that was a great day. It was a really fun-filled day.
Probably when I went to Sudbury in Ottawa. I was supposed to fly to Ottawa one time, and flights ended up getting mixed up, so then I ended up having to drive it, and I'm not going to tell you how fast I drove, but it was a lot faster than I was supposed to. And same with Sudbury, I had to fly up, and then it was like a $80 cab ride to the track, and I said I was just better off just to drive it myself. Probably would have saved me a little less money. So